Pacific Justice Institute on a part-time basis in the state of Ohio. So I'm pretty excited because in my private practice that I started my own firm last February, I do mostly intellectual property work, like trademark stuff. So it's, I went to law school to do First Amendment religious liberty work. So in my 12th year, I finally get to do some kingdom work aside, along with my private practice. So I went to the Ohio State University Morris College of Law, graduated in 2011. I live with my wife in a town called Lewis Center, just north of Columbus. It's showing that God has a sense of humor. I found my wife late in life, in my later 30s, upper 30s, and we were set to get married on March 21st of 2020. And so that was the weekend after everything got shut down, so we had to figure out what to do there. And then, yeah, so we're praying for children, so if you want anything to pray for that. So actually, before I worked with PGI, I did have an opportunity to help a gentleman in Toledo who they were trying to prosecute for having pro-life signs in his yard. So I've done some religious liberty work, but now I'm excited to do a lot more. I know that you all asked a very specific question when asking for a speaker. I'm going to give a broad overview of parental rights and how to work in public schools. So I may not specifically answer the question like question answer, but in terms of the information here should help for you. So just a quick disclaimer, you can't have an attorney give a presentation without a disclaimer. This is not legal advice, you're not my client. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact a lawyer of your choosing, or come have a business card, we can have a conversation privately as well. So, without further ado, I'm going to give a little bit of an update on, or a description of what PGI does. So it's a legal nonprofit devoted primarily to defending religious liberty and parental rights. So PGI has fought and is currently fighting a lot of different battles, a variety of concerns, including and especially in public schools. We work diligently to provide our clients with dedicated, exceptional legal support, and it's funded entirely by generous supporters. So here's kind of the four basic areas: protecting life, so taking on pro-life cases with the COVID-19 vaccines. There's a gentleman as part of PGI in Michigan who has succeeded in getting his clients who were refused transplants because he wasn't vaccinated. They were able to get him on the list. So those are some of the things that PGI works on. Legislative advocacy, I'm testifying before legislatures and states. I'm trying to think of an example. I couldn't do it, but there was when they had the ballot initiative here in Ohio to extend the constitutional voting threshold to 60%, and that was something that's open. So something that you can think about if you're passionate about something. Most of the time, any legislation has an open period of public comment. That's something we do when we can. Parental rights, again, engaging with school boards, parent advocacy groups, and religious liberty, litigating for churches, parents, employees, and students. And so they take a proactive role, which is why they offer the free speaking. So churches and businesses and groups that want to know the rights, they'll send attorneys like me out to talk about that. They want to make sure that everybody gets the help they need, no too small case, no too big case, and so they offer all legal assistance at no cost, and they don't require any retainer or upfront payment for representation. There's currently, the way these slides are made, I think this is still true, but there's offices in 22 states. The name Pacific Justice Institute. Do you want me? Well, I'll send this PowerPoint via email if anybody wants to have a copy of it. And so we're in 22 different states, and Pacific Justice Institute started in the Pacific Northwest, so that's why the name, I think, kind of sometimes is why maybe that's why people in Ohio maybe haven't heard of the group. And they're currently involved in 130 active cases, and the average attorney fees for cases that they take, through the courts is around $500,000 per case. So all donations go directly to fund cases and provide free resources. All right, so one thing I did want to say, so I did, for a while, I taught a class at Columbus State. It's a local community college, and I like it to be a lot more interactive, so feel free to ask questions and interrupt me. I will not be offended. I may not be the most engaging or entertaining speaker on the planet, so if I bore you, feel free to ask questions. But we'll talk today about parental rights. So again, I know this was precipitated by a very specific question that somebody had, but I'm hoping to equip you to know what your rights are as parents and how to engage with the system. So you may be surprised, I'm going to put some quotes up here from the U.S. Supreme Court. I do want to note, too, that even though we have 130 active cases, litigation sometimes is the last resort, so we try to think of ways to prevent litigation from happening unless it's absolutely necessary. But courts give school boards broad discretion, and Ohio is no different. School boards have a lot of discretion. I live in Olentangy School District. It's the 4th largest district in the state, and the community around it is a very conservative community, but the school board, for whatever reason, has been able to handpick very progressive agenda. What they'll do is they'll nominate somebody to take over when somebody's stepping off, and then they basically get reelected. So that's something to be aware of. Maybe that's something, and we'll talk about this more later, but to think about running for school board, because they can create policies. So some things you might be really surprised about. Here's a couple quotes from the U.S. Supreme Court. This one's in 2000. I know some of them are older, but this has been reestablished. But here, in a case about the scope of grandparent visitation versus parental visitation, the court said, quote, the interest of parents in the care, custody, and control of their children is perhaps the oldest of the fundamental liberty interests recognized by this court. So, in other words, that may be the highest right in this country is to raise your kids. Well, yeah, that was my question. At the end of this quote, and I was going to say that. I was going to say, how do you feel about? Do you feel that these are being upheld? But it quoted all these cases that go back 100 years. Here's 1923, where the Supreme Court held that liberty protected by the Due Process Clause includes the rights of parents to establish a home and bring up children and to control the education of their children. That's 100 years ago. In 1925, the liberty of parents and guardians includes the right to direct the upbringing and education of children under the control. In that case, the court went on to say that the child's not a mere creature of the state. Those who nurture him and direct his destiny have the right, coupled with the duty, to prepare him for additional obligations. So again, the court has a strong history of talking about parental rights. 1944. A constitutional dimension to the right of parents to direct the upbringing of their children. The quote is cardinal with us that the custody, care, and nurture of the child resides first in the parents. So these are pretty strong sentiments. Somebody already said, but my question here is, do we feel like this is being upheld and supported in the current climate? Well, what about Ohio? You may be surprised to know that Ohio has very similar sentiment. This is from 1877. The court said, as a general rule, the parents are entitled to the custody of their minor children. And so this is paramount to that of all other persons, that the parent is able to take care of their child. So this particular case was a custody case about a father seeking custody over others. And the father was given priority, with the exception of the mother, when the child is in tender years. That was in 1877. And in this case, a trial court said that government will not interfere with the right to the control and custody of minor children by their parents, except in cases of neglect or delinquency. So in other words, if there's, right now, currently the statute is abuse, neglect, and dependency. Those are the three ways that parents can take children away. Social services can take children away from parents. And so the courts are saying, still saying today, that with the exception of those things, the parents' rights are paramount. So the court has even, I've done a couple of appeals on the court-appointed list, And there's a couple cases that talk about how parental rights are, the removal of parental rights are described as the death penalty in parental rights cases. So the Ohio Supreme Court actually affords parents who have the rights taken away with the right to legal counsel. So that's how important the right to have parents. Yes, go ahead.
So this is relevant, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
to this question, or this Supreme Court ruling with the neglect or delinquency. Does that include anything where if the child, now today, they're coaxing them into boy being a girl being a boy, can the state remove if they feel there's neglect that the parent feels differently?
So unfortunately, it's going the other way, especially in states like California. If
Like in
you
Washington.
aren't encouraging your child and giving them the ability, the gender-affirming care that they need, then CPS gets involved. Luckily, Ohio has not done that yet. At the end of the presentation, I do have some ideas to avoid Child Protective Services, just in case that ever happens in Ohio. But you would think that that would be the way it would go, but the way the current climate is, it's the other direction.
So in Ohio, they're not, that has not come out.
I'm not aware of any happening yet. I'm sure we will be made aware if that does happen, but that would be the exact argument that I would make, is that this is, I'm the one nurturing this child to be, these parents are nurturing them, the best interest in their health and safety. That's the argument that I would make,
Yeah.
but to my knowledge, that hasn't occurred either way, other than like on some of the Pacific states where they're going the other direction. So that's why some of this presentation might seem like doom and gloom preparation type stuff, but it's not meant to be that. It's meant to be, this is meant to at least be encouraging that the law does exist, because nobody wants to know this. But this is the state, this is what our courts have said for 100 years, 150 years.
I just worry that, like, the court can, if they're a liberal court, could take neglect a different way.
Yeah,
They change the definition is
Right.
ultimately what happens to get, their overall
Agenda.
agenda.
No, I think that is a risk. We're seeing it, like I said, in California, but that would definitely, like I said, be, the way the courts are currently set up, I don't think we're in the immediate.
Ohio's really too conservative right now.
Ohio's
but
not in the huge danger of that happening in the immediate, but I don't know 10, 20 years from now what that's
Be
going to look like.
prepared,
Yeah, so basically.
be prepared.
All right, so I'm going to talk specifically about rights that are enumerated under Ohio law that you do have, and this might apply a little bit to the question about inappropriate material in the art class. You do have a right under this statute to request any assignment that's been graded, any questionnaire or survey that goes out prior to being administered to your child. You can ask for textbooks, workbooks, software, videos, or other instructional materials, any completed and graded tests, and also the statewide academic standards. So you have the right to request all these things in writing. This is kind of like the lawyer legalese, make sure you do it in writing. I talk to people sometimes and say, well, I've asked for that 20 times. And like, have you ever put it in writing? Well, no. So like, paper, that's kind of some advice I can give. Because what you need to do is talk to the teacher. If the teacher doesn't care, you can escalate it to the principal. If the principal doesn't care, you can escalate it to the superintendent. If they don't care, we'll talk about some other potential options there. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay, can a normal, regular citizen request these materials, or does it need to be a parent?
The way the statute's written is a parent about their child's. But you could do, like, if it's a public school, you could do a public records request, Freedom of Information Act. That's not in this presentation, but that's a good question, because that's something I do in private practice. If I need information, the government will drag your heels and may charge you money. But if, as a parent, you can request this stuff without being charged any money. But I know that did happen in the school district I lived in. People requested a copy of surveys that they gave children and were able to get it that way. Of course, they dragged their feet and it took forever. But there's a mechanism to, because government is supposed to be for the people, by the people. So that is our information. That belongs to us. That doesn't belong to the government. And that's, at least in theory, that's the way it's supposed to work. So you have a right to receive a copy of the most recent report card. I just threw that in there as just additional right. That one seems kind of obvious, but it is actually in the statute. So I do want to talk a little bit about opting out. You do have the right to opt out of certain classes, and that I put up in red is by written request. So you want to make sure that if your student is participating in these categories of education that you don't want them to have, you can opt out there. So venereal disease education is what the statute calls it, essentially STDs. Like if they have education, sex ed, essentially, you can opt out of that, which today might be one of those things that you would want to consider because nobody knows what exactly they're being taught. I mean, you can ask for the information, but if you see it and you don't like it, you can opt out, but make sure you do it in writing. Child abuse, sexual prevention. Let's see. Personal safety and assault prevention, sexual violence prevention, suicide awareness and prevention, social inclusion, and this one I had to look up, like, what does social inclusion mean? And so I got a definition online, and this is something you might want to keep an eye on. It says, the process of improving terms on which individuals and groups take part in society, improving the ability, opportunity, and dignity of those disadvantaged on the basis of their identity. So that seems like something you might want to keep your eye on.
Oh, those words.
But social inclusion, doesn't that sound so nice?
Oh, yes, sounds so, wow, comforting.
Yeah, go ahead.
Preparation.
Oh,
Then why in some cases do they not arrest the teachers that don't even let the parents know, especially in the transgender cases? Why is that?
We'll get to those. We'll get to why in a second, because I'll talk about. I'm going to harp on my school district, Olentangy, a little bit. But there's a reason. There's a reason they're trying to get away with it. Things that they claim on a legal perspective. But I will definitely get to that question. And then also on first aid instruction, you have the right to opt out of that, like CPR and stuff like that. So this was interesting to me. This is a statute in the state of Ohio that sexual education must have all the following information. Stress that students should abstain from sexual activity until after marriage. Teach the potential physical, psychological, emotional, and social side effects of participating in sexual activity outside of marriage. Teach that children out of wedlock is likely to have harmful consequences for the child's parents, and society. Stress that sexually transmitted diseases are serious possible hazards of sexual activity, and advise students of the laws pertaining to financial responsibility related to children born out of wedlock, and it's criminal to have sexual contact with a person under the age of 16, and emphasize adoption as an option for unintended pregnancies. That's what's required to be taught. Just, you know. Outside of this, if a school provides any additional sex ed outside of this, and this kind of goes a little bit to your question because I'm going to try to close the circle, but they might claim, this is why some of these categories are important, because if they might claim like, oh, that's just part of sex ed, but if they're teaching anything other than that list we just described, you have the right to ask for the name of the instructor. Actually, let me take a step back. The school must inform you of the name of the instructor, the vendor, and the name of the curriculum, and then you can request a copy of the curriculum, and you have to get written permission to allow a student to take part of any sexual education other than what was listed on the previous slide. So just be aware of that, right? That might not be something that they'll make you aware of. You might get a slip home that says, you know, sex ed, you sign it, but make sure that you're taking a look at what they're actually being taught. There's also medical rights. In addition to sexual education. So you can object to having a student being medically evaluated in the schools. So this kind of also goes to the transgender issue, because what, you know, right now schools and counselors are encouraging, essentially what's a social contagion of, well, we think this is what you should do. So just be aware of that. You can also deny the right to dental examinations. I'm not sure why that's in the statute, but that's in there. And then vaccines. There's exemptions available if you get a note from a doctor, especially for a student who has who's naturally immune to rubella, mumps, and chickenpox that they received it. We think the same would have been true for COVID-19 vaccines. I don't think that ever became a thing where any school in Ohio required students to get it, but the CDC said children up to 5, or as young as 5 could receive it. I'm not aware of any school that forced that, but I think you could have gotten around it. Yes, go ahead.
I thought a parent could opt out of the vaccines for any reason.
Yeah, you can.
Right? You don't need
Right.
a doctor's opinion.
But that's a specific, in the statute, that's a specific way that you can do it.
Got
But yeah,
it.
you could opt out of
I
those.
mean, I never was anti-vax until this whole COVID thing, and I hate to say it, but now I'm pretty much, I would tell anybody with young kids to, skip the vax for a while and see what happens.
Yeah.
'Cause
I had a
they're
friend,
gaming us with the vax.
I have a friend in
All of them.
Michigan that I grew up with, and he's a nurse, and he doesn't do any vaccinations for
Yeah.
him or his kids. I mean, way before COVID, and I never
Right.
understood it, but I think I understand it a little bit.
I'm
more.
getting it now too. I'm the same way. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
How did that work with the universities? Didn't a lot of the colleges and universities mandate the vaccine?
So college is different. We're talking about K through 12, like public education. Universities have different, because most of the time it's assumed that the children are adults,
Yeah, out.
that the people in it, yeah, so there was a lot of litigation associated with that ever since the emergency's been lifted, and everybody has quietly reversed I'm not aware of any mandate left. Even hospitals in like New York City has reversed their mandates and have actually hired some people back quietly. I don't know if there ever was any actual result from the university. We'll go over here and then I'll come to you. Yeah, go ahead.
As far as Frank's question goes, there's a specific format that you need to fill out, and you have to send it in writing every year to the superintendent for each individual child, to get
To
them
opt out,
exempt, to
yeah.
opt out.
Yeah, so I don't have,
And it's any vaccine.
yes, I don't have any copies or anything like that. It might be school district specific, so I'm just bringing this up to let you know, yes, this is something that you can do. I'm gonna go to him and then I'll come to you. Go ahead.
You know what, give me a minute, I'll
Okay.
come back.
All right, go ahead.
It's not right now, I apologize.
No problem.
My children are grown now, and when my mother was a secretary for a professional secretary for attorneys here, and she wrote up a note that I am refusing vaccines for my child due to philosophical reasons, and then if there's an outbreak in this such and such of area, I will take my child immediately out of school. And that's all I used all the way through, even in college, because there were required vaccines when my daughter went to art school.
We just used it last year for a nephew.
Yeah, just make sure it's in writing, that's the best.
Yeah.
Don't casually mention to a teacher. Document, that's advice for like any legal issue. Yeah, go ahead.
Back to the college mandate, I mean, you're saying that kids assume they're adults, but isn't that even a stronger argument, saying that as an adult, you should have your own choice?
Yeah,
Or enforce
I think that's true, but I think that goes outside of like the scope of parental rights, because I mean, that goes into like even thinking of, workplace requirements, so depending on the state, there were some decisions that struck down certain requirements or some that upheld them. So it just kind of depended almost on the ideology of the court of where you asked it. I don't think the issue was ever settled, but now that nobody's getting vaxxed anymore, I don't think anybody, it's one of those things that's kind of, I feel like never really got resolved.
See, and I apologize, I think that's part of the problem with all this is a lot of people are trying to fold the rug back over everything that and I have full faith that something like that is gonna happen. So unless we have the right resolutions in place and we're ready for when this happens again, I don't believe they're done with us at all.
100%.
With the parental rights thing and back to the schools, I guess I can only bring this up now. There was a case coming out of Mayfield Heights, high school, are you familiar with that?
I'm not.
Okay, that's probably the most important one in the state from what I understand. It was specifically about masks, at the very beginning of it, and it was based on parental rights from the beginning. Another thing with that specific school system, and here's another thing that they just tried to disappear and make us forget about, was when our
Do you know, was that in federal court or state court? Do you know?
Last I was aware, it was in the state Supreme Court.
Okay, I'm gonna look into that one for sure and add it.
Yeah, it's out of Mayfield Heights High School, out of west side, or east side of Cleveland. That might be a real, important place to.
Yeah, to start.
I think that one's going forward. I
Okay.
think it's going to-
Yeah, I'll definitely follow that. The U.S. Supreme Court's hearing a case called, I don't know if it's Gross or Gross, but GROSS, that deals with the EEOC, and it's an employment case in terms of employment requiring the vaccinations. It's still out there, but I think that like at least the news coverage
So
of it
they
is.
really want us to forget it
I
all
think so.
happens to us, and I just think that if we allow that to happen, we're gonna be in big trouble.
Yeah, and I think that goes both ways. I think that we've developed strategies as a result, and I'm sure the other side has developed strategies as well. But some of that, there are strategic decisions in place in terms of courts, but as we sit right now, I don't think it's been like nationally decided, but the Gross or the Gross
It
case
shouldn't
might
be nationally decided, state sovereignty should decide it, it shouldn't be.
It depends, no, I see what you're saying, but it depends on, like, if it's federal employment, or, because a lot of the cases were federal employment cases, and then a lot of them were hospital cases, and so I think that, yeah.
But at the level of parental rights, like we're talking about.
Yeah, right.
They forced me to do things and make decisions about my children in the school system, that when I questioned it with factual information, with information that was public source information, and stuff that anybody could have found, I was basically told by the superintendent, I'm doing my job. Well, if the superintendent is doing what he's being told to do, then there's somebody else telling him what to do. That means that the people we've elected aren't really doing their job anyway, they're doing what they're told by someone else. And that's a real
And you're
problem.
thinking at the
And
federal
You can't just
level?
get it, say again?
At the federal level?
I'm talking about.
Education's at the
my
state,
school.
it's at the state level, yeah.
It's going up and up and up from somewhere, and it's
Yeah.
coming down from somewhere. But when my superintendent tells me I can't make the decisions not to put masks on these kids, even though I think it's stupid, Dave, and you've proven it to me 100% with your background and information, you've shown me, I believe that kids should not be wearing masks at school, and neither should my teachers. But I had teachers that were berating my child constantly, just for trying to breathe. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
and
I'm not-
Teachers union.
But even that, I think, is like school district specific, because
It
I'm
wasn't, it was statewide. Nobody across the state can say that their school wasn't doing that stuff.
Yeah.
Everybody's school had masks on,
Yeah,
every
money-
teacher.
money was involved.
Right,
Oh, yeah.
right, and the
Yeah.
federal government.
It was everywhere.
Correct. You want your
I was
money,
one of
If you
those
want
that
your
we walked
federal
around the
subsidy,
circle
you're not
without
gonna get
I know it, I saw. I kept my kid out of school. I would
Which-
not let my
which
kid
school
go to
district,
kindergarten.
by the way?
Austin town.
Which school district were you in?
Western Reserve.
My grandkids went to board with the same garbage.
Yeah, it was every school. And,
Ridiculous.
I mean, I know mine is a very small and conservative school, and they did, so I know everything else.
Yeah, it was
The
ridiculous.
Catholic schools did.
Yeah. You know what though, Austin town did not.
Yes,
I
they
was
did.
gonna say,
They absolutely masked their kids on the bus
I
everywhere.
thought they
Listen,
were.
let's go on to that part.
They wear them on buses too.
And that was another thing, after they made a
Yeah, I had
decision
to
in
wear
the
them on the
school
buses,
system
even
that it
after
was
school.
okay, the federal